Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this morning. We're having a webinar for our CENELEC community about the matrix of responsibilities for requesting your common modification to IEC standards, and also including the inclusion of the Annex ZZA in IEC standards. My name is Els, and I will be, as usual, moderating the webinar in the background. So a bit of the housekeeping rules. As usual, you're all muted during the webinar, so you will not be able to to raise your question out loud, but you can enter your questions in the Q&A panel of the Zoom webinar, as you can see on the slide. So the speakers will take a moment to reply your questions after the presentations. The complete webinar has been recorded for the moment, so you will have the possibility to listen back if you would like to do so. Should you be on Twitter, please feel free to use the hashtag #TrainingForStandards, and you can find CEN and CENELEC on Standards for EU. So let's take a moment to present you the speakers of today. My colleagues Gonzalo Asensao and Frédéric Nanau are connected on their side to guide you to this matrix. So please, Gonzalo, no, sorry, it's first Frédéric's turn. The floor is yours. Let us present the agenda of today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Els. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I will take the control. I will share my screen so that I will control the slides. I think you see my screen now.
Yes, all good.
Perfect. So the agenda for this morning. So we'll start by reminding some key principles of the Frankfurt Agreement. Then we will re-explain the parallel process between CENELEC and IEC. And then we will go into the meat of the webinar of today about the matrix of responsibilities, or matrix of different possibilities. We will end the webinar with some key takeaways and with the last slide with some additional information. So the Frankfurt Agreement, it's an agreement between IEC and CENELEC, an agreement on common planning of new work and parallel development. The agreement foresees that IEC is the primary actor that is developing the standard, has the lead in developing the standard. The agreement has been done to have a rational use of the available resources and to have a timely development of international standard to respond to the market needs. The agreement as well includes a mechanism to address specific needs for European stakeholders. So again, the agreement is about common development and parallel voting of the new work. There's a common planning. So IEC developed the standards, and at the same time at CENELEC, we vote at the same time as IEC. We will see that in the next slide. The agreement foresees as well that when a new reference is created at CENELEC, it is automatically offered to IEC and converted into an EN-IEC standard. For parallel work, some standards can be exempted from parallel procedure. They can be permanently exempted or temporarily exempted, and if it's the case, they are listed in the exemption list. Standards that are exempted could be standards for products, for example, that are not allowed in the European market. So the parallel procedures foresees a complete alignment between CENELEC and IEC. So from the start of each ballot, both procedures are fully aligned. The inquiry at CENELEC and the CDV at IEC are done at the same time. And same thing for the formal vote and the FDIS ballot. They are done and start at the same time. We'll see that in the next slide. So this is the parallel process, the full parallel process between IEC and CENELEC. So I said earlier, CENELEC has the lead. CENELEC the IEC, sorry, the IEC-TC drafts the EN-IEC standard, and the CENELEC TC is in charge of developing the European elements, and if needed, the common modes. The ballots starts at the same time. The inquiry is done fully in parallel with the CDV, and same thing for the formal vote that is done fully in parallel with the FDIS. When the CENELEC TC needs to request the assessment, the CENELEC TC provides the European elements and all the needed elements to CCLC. The needed elements could be the Annex ZD for the normative references and the Annex ZZ for the links between the essential requirements and the clause of the standard. Once the elements received, CCMC requests the assessment to the HAS contractor, that is EY, and then the request is dispatched to a HAS consultant. A project or work item can be assessed a maximum of 4 times during its development. There's 1 assessment per stage, plus the first working draft that is optional, and in case of lack of compliant assessment at formal votes, the LCA assessment, but it's not visible on this slide. At the end of the development, if the last assessment is compliant, the reference is offered for citation to the European Commission, and upon approval of the desk officer, the standard is listed in the official journal. Now we see here a small rectangle with common modifications written. So it's placed here indicatively. The TC can request to have common modifications at any stage. The best would be to have them requested at the beginning of the process, for example, following a first working draft, because then the common modification project could be run in parallel, fully in parallel with the EN-IEC. Just as a reminder, the common modifications are European amendments to address specific European needs. So the TC can decide later, or can have the need to create common modification later. For example, when there's a lack of compliant assessment at formal vote, and when there's no way anymore to address the comments from the HAS consultants in the IEC draft, then the common modifications could be requested at formal vote. There are several possibilities to request common modes and to help technical bodies to understand and to clarify when, what steps have to be done depending at what stage the common modifications are requested and who should do the action. We have developed the matrix of responsibilities to further help technical bodies understand what steps have to be done and who should do the different steps. And so to explain more in details the matrix of responsibilities, I will give the floor to Gonzalo, who will guide you through this new matrix of responsibility. Gonzalo, I will give you the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. I hope you can all see my screen now.
Yes, all good.
So, as you said, Brad, I will try to guide you through the matrix of the different responsibilities. And it's important to let everyone know that there are quite an extensive list of possibilities, and there are a few elements that are key. For instance, the first one is that we have different roles and responsibilities, and we'll try to guide you through all of those. There are different actions that are needed, and will depend also at what step you are, which means that we also need to take certain actions at certain specific points. Also, a key point is that the actions will depend when we are engaging in a process. So we really need to be at what stage we are, so that we have to see if we are too late or if we are too early, and so on. In terms of the responsibility in the roles, so there are 3 main groups of roles and responsibilities. So we are focusing on technical bodies, CCMC, and the technical board. So those are the main levels that will guide you through. Then, the main elements of the matrix have been focused on 3 key points, which is the first one, when the project is started. At the moment IEC starts the project, as Fred explained, when we are not in an exemption situation. So IEC starts the project, and in CENELEC we follow. The project at the moment is created very early in the process, so around the ACD or the review report. So the projects are created. And as part of the management of the work program, you can already keep an eye on those elements. Then the second main point where things happen are the notification to the CDV from IEC. And so there are also another trigger to take some kind of action. And finally, very late already in the process is the notification to the FDs, where some activities or actions may be required from our side. Then, as Fred highlighted, we are 100% highlighted with IEC. So if IEC starts a CDV on a parallel project, the CENELEC inquiry will start. If IEC starts the FDs, the CENELEC formal vote will start for the same project. Important to highlight, and so that you are aware as well. So IEC notifies CCMC prior to the CDV. So when the document is submitted for translation, so the document we are aware, and mostly on this trigger, we are also inviting technical bodies to provide European elements when they are not already providing to us ahead of that. And for FDs, the process is a little bit more challenging. The notification is really late. So it's really crucial that the technical bodies are mirroring the work at IEC level, so that they are prepared, so that we can still take actions at the relevant moment. Then, as Fred highlighted, so in the BT efficiency, we have been discussing the matrix. So here is just to give you a slide. So we will circulate it after the presentation, and we will make a communication to all technical bodies to circulate the matrix. There is one part connected to the preparation of common mods. And of course, if you have Annex ZZ for harmonized standards. And then there is a second part, which is basically when we are in the pure parallel process, and we just want to bring the Annex ZZ. So there are those two elements, because then the actions are different. And what I'll be doing now is guide you through the main steps of this matrix, so that you are aware what are the different roles and actions associated with which phase. At the same time, what we are currently doing is updating the pages in the CENELEC BOSS about the common modifications. So the matrix will be included there. Some of the supporting material will also be included, and this will be updated in the coming weeks. So we will start first with introduction of common modifications in the parallel work with IEC. So, as I said before, when IEC starts on the CENELEC, at the moment we are starting. So the project is created, and as a technical body responsible, whether you are in an SR or in the technical committee, you can also mirror the activities on the IEC side and also on the CENELEC side. So the first block of actions that we have identified is from the creation of the project up to 2 weeks before the CDV start. So whenever we are in this situation, and if you need common modifications, as a technical body, the only thing you need to do is to inform CCMC that there is need to create the so-called A11, so to create the European amendment to the IEC project. And in this situation, you don't need to provide the new work item for. Based on this request, which should be provided to the technical project manager or to data service, you send this information to CCMC, and it's a CCMC responsibility to create the 11 project. So, and as of that date, of course, we will have eventually 2 work items, one for the parallel project and one for the common modifications. If everything is correctly performed, and just to be clear, in this case, under this situation, BT doesn't need to take a decision. So in line with the current Frankfurt Agreement, we can create these common modifications without a BT decision. So The 2 weeks prior to the CDV, this main block has been created because if you provide common mods to CCMC, we also need to edit those documents, and this needs to be done in order to be circulating an A11 for common modifications and the parallel project for the IEC document. So that's why we have these 2 weeks prior to the CDV, so that we can edit the document if you provide common modifications, and then we can circulate both of them in parallel. So if we follow this step, and of course this is also connected with the technical discussions, this is not always easy, but if we do this, you can still move on literally in parallel with IEC, because the A11 can be launched at the same time. And in this case, and we have examples of this situation, we have the launch of the inquiry for the IEC parallel project and for the common mod. So you'll have 2 work items that are connected. Then we move a little bit further. So if we are already after, so if the parallel project is already after or 2 weeks from the start of the CDV, then in this case, and in line also with the Frankfurt Agreement, you can still request an A11, so there is no need for new work item form. And there is also an important action from your side, because at this moment you will be during the CDV, so you could also provide during the national inquiry if there is a need for common modifications. So this is something that can also be used for this process. If you request, of course, a common modification between these periods, so between the start of the CDV and the end of the CDV, CCMC will also create the A11 in the database, and of course, then you can handle an A11 as an homegrown project. It is important for you to be aware that the more we advance in the process, the higher is the risk of having a disconnection between the ENIC project and the common modification, so the A11. So I think this is something that you will see. The more we advance, the higher is the risk that the 2 may not be published at the same time. So that's also why it's really important to have an early involvement and to have an assessment whether we need common modification. Now, we will then be after the end of the CDV. So the document at this stage will be reworked in IEC. And from that moment on, if you want to create common modifications, then you need to follow the process of coming with a new work item form for an A11, request these common modifications to be developed independently from the standard. So in this situation, whenever you send your A11 for procedures, it will not be connected with the same phase of the ENIC project. Using this situation, so you come with a new work item form. So basically, we are following the normal procedure to go to BT to request a new work item. CCMC, of course, will create the process, so prepare the proposal for BT decision, and BT needs to take a decision on this new work item. As I highlighted, of course, here there is a risk, or it's most likely there is a disconnection between the ENIC and the common modifications. So it is also important to realize that we have the ENIC project and we have a common mod with a different flow. And so there is a need also to decide when this A11 is created, whether the ENIC can go until the very end and be published, or whether they should be waiting until the common mods are available for the publication. But this is just for you to give you the framework. You know that at this moment, IEC will get close to the finalization, so they will publish the document after they have this, and we need to decide whether we can publish this parallel project or whether we need to wait for the common modifications. And I think it's also important to highlight that common modifications are not only necessary when we are talking about harmonized standards, they are also necessary in other situations. Then we've moved to the final step. So at this stage, IEC is already moved to the publication. So after the FT, so in between the finalization or the availability of the IEC project, if we identify the need to have common modifications at this stage, then we are more or less in the same situation as in the previous step. So new work item form is needed from the technical body. Of course, the NIC is already available, so or will be shortly available. So then the A11 will have to follow a different route and will come later. For CCMC, the same action based on the request from the technical body will propose a decision to BT. And then the work item is created upon the BT decision. I would also open a parenthesis. There is at the moment a new IT project to change the process to deal with the new work item creation. In principle, after October, there will be a new way of making this the creation of these new work items through a more streamlined process. But whenever the process will be close to be finalized, there will be, of course, a webinar. The main concept doesn't change, so there is a decision to be taken. But of course, this process for the creation of the work items may be more streamlined, but the way that we interact or integrate with IEC will not change as such. Then we go into a different discussion, and then we are entering, of course, only in harmonized standards, which is when we want to bring the Annex ZZ and the Annex ZA in the parallel work with IEC. Again, this is also something that is happening, so it's a possibility. Several TCs are working very closely and working very well, so they are able to provide the European elements so that we can circulate it together with the IEC, with IEC start of the different procedures. Before moving on, and the sequence will be pretty much similar to what you have seen for the common modifications. I wanted to point out the following. So Annex ZZ and Annex ZA are not considered common modifications. So if they are provided on time, and you will see it in the next slides, then we are able to include it in the dispatch for the votes, you know, at the inquiry and at the formal vote. So this is something that is important. So here, I would say that, you know, the timeliness of the provision of the document is even more important than when we are for the common mods, because for the common mods, in a way, we create a specific project, so which has their own time frame. So as you will see in the next slides, the matrix follows pretty much the same logic as the one for the common modifications. And again, you know, we focus on actions from the technical body, the CCMC actions and BT actions if needed. So from the very beginning of the creation of the project up to 2 weeks before the CDV, and again here we emphasize a little bit the 2 weeks again, because, you know, if we need to provide the documents together with the launch of the inquiry, it's important that the information comes to us as early as possible. In terms of actions, so the technical body, of course, needs to confirm, you know, the link to the legislation of the project and the standardization request. There is also, of course, a BT decision, you know, allowing the technical bodies to request a draft Annex ZA, of course, when we are talking about revisions of existing standards, so that they can prepare their work. And from the technical body side, you know, you are also supposed to provide to us the Annex ZA and the ZA and ZZ to be provided to us so that we can then include it in the procedures. From the CCMC side, we of course update all the links on the legislation, and if we receive the document from the technical body, we will circulate the Annex ZZ together with the NIC. And if we are on track, we will request as assessment at the same step as well. In this case, BT has no action needed, and the important thing is that if we are within these time frames, we can continue the parallel process. So the document will be essentially the same. The Annex ZZ will be provided through the inquiry, and we are still aligned with IEC. Then we move to the next step. And here the matrix is slightly different from the process for the common mods. And this has actually been slightly modified based on the current experience. So, and we have seen that very often we only receive the Annex ZA and the ZZ sometimes already during the CDV. And I continue to emphasize that it's important to have it as early as possible. But whenever we are ready from the 2 weeks before the CDV up to the FDs, so in this case, there is no need to provide the new work item form. So you just ask to create a new work item for an A11. We need to be very careful, of course. Here it will be an A11 because we are not aligned with the parallel process, but will not be considered a modification, because if it's just Annex ZA, ZZ, it's not a modification. You will need to provide, of course, the Annex ZA to CCMC so that we can follow the request for the as assessment. And whenever we are in this range of time, so we will create the A11 in the database, we will request as assessment if we receive, of course, the Annex Z and the Annex ZA. And in the same approach as before, because we don't need a BT decision in this phase. Of course, and I will emphasize this point, we should, of course, close as much as possible the provision of the Annex ZA to the phase where the project is. So if IEC is going to a CDV, you know, the Annex ZA should come around this period here and not very close to the FDs, because then we are already moving into the next phase of the project, which is this one. So whenever we are between 1 week prior to the FDs and the closure of the FDs, from that moment on, we will not be able to be in parallel with IEC, which means that the creation of the new work item will need to follow the process of new work item form provided to CCMC. CCMC will make a proposal to create the work item for the A11, and then a BT decision will be required on this new work item. What is also important is the discussion about what to do with the parallel project, because those will be in principle going together. So if the IEC project is going to the publication and we want to create an amendment just for the Annex ZZ, we should also decide if we publish the NIEC project and if the 11 will come later on to correct. So there is also associated with this step the need to assess whether we need to remove the link to the legislation from the NIEC project, and then the 11 will correct and harmonize the project at the very end. More often these days, and I think this is something that we should also reflect, sometimes there is no decision and the document, the ENIC project, basically remains pending. It's not published on the CENELEC side. But so this is an important point for you to take into consideration. What is clear, of course, here at this level is that if we are ready after this phase, the IEC project will be published, and the harmonization, so the provision of the Annex ZZ will be through an A11, which means that they will not be provided at the same time unless we take a decision to do that at the same, to publish the two together, which means that we will have to hold the parallel IEC project pending until the A11 in this case is made available. Again, emphasizing that we are talking about an A11 for the Annex ZZ. Because if you want to bring common modifications, we would be, you know, in the previous matrix part. So, and I just want to highlight that in certain cases, you know, we can easily change from just Annex ZZ to common modifications, but we need to be careful about the processes. And as I said, the way forward in this case, because we are after the FDs, we will have to come with a new project anyway, so an A11. Finally, then we are talking about the steps after the FDs. So when the IEC project and the CENELEC, of course, the parallel CENELEC project is already after the formal vote. IEC in this case will make the document available, or it's already available. So if we want to bring the Annex Z in this situation, so a new work item form will be required, and of course this A11 will have to be provided by the technical body to CCMC. So CCMC in this situation will make a proposal to BT to create a new work item for an A11, and the technical board needs to take a decision. Of course, it's clear here in this situation when we create a work item after the finalization that in most of the time IEC is already published, and we have also the possibility to publish the CENELEC endorsement of the IEC project, or if the TC decides in that way, you could eventually also hold the publication of the ENIC and wait for the 11 to be published. Then I come closer to the end of the presentation. So some key elements from the parallel procedures, and also from the aspects related to the matrix that has been developed and created. So as we have highlighted, the procedures are 100% aligned with IEC, so we have very little margin to adapt around the IEC target dates. As we said, IEC informs about the start of the CDD, which we align the inquiry. The same thing for the FTs and the start of the formal vote. As we have highlighted, the roles are different at every step, and the actions will depend at what timing you are in relation to the IEC status. So I think this is important. We are aware that this is not this is far from being simple, but as there are so many different possibilities, it was important, that you put yourself in a specific phase, that you see where the IEC project is, and of course the European endorsement of the IEC project, and this is the trigger for the assessment of what are the steps and actions that you need to take. In line with the Frankfurt Agreement, there is the possibility to include common modifications, and the matrix now makes clear the steps and how to create the work items for these common modifications. An important point, and I think this is, and I've seen also some of the questions since the very beginning. It is true that sometimes it can be challenging to be 100% aligned with IEC, but it's possible, and some TCs are managing to do that. So the Annex Z and the Annex Z8 can be circulated in parallel. So, and then we can follow the rhythm of IEC as well. A key point, depending on the status of your work item, there are several possibilities. I think the main key element, as we have been highlighting through the matrix steps, is you really need to see where you are. So depending on the phase, the timing where you are, you can take a decision on this specific moment. And then, of course, if your project advances, then you need to assess what are the situation a little bit later on. Finally, and I think this is also a key element, the earlier you start thinking about if you need common modifications, the preparation of the Annex ZZ and Annex ZA. So this is really crucial for you to be aware and to really start from the very beginning to do that. So in addition, just a final point, as I said, and which is connected to the follow-up of the work program. So the main crucial target dates are today available in CENELEC and in IEC. So you can see here, this is an example of a parallel project. And if you see in the time plan, so when you are in the work item plan, the milestones, you see the adjusted dates. So this is the intended start of the CDV, and of course of the inquiry of the CENELEC project. So this is visible through projects online, and you can find the dates and the target dates, which are connected to IEC target date. So as you see here, through the IEC portal, you have the plan, the confirmed CDV, which is July 2023. So those dates now are connected. So you have two ways to find your way to know when the procedures are supposed to start. Of course, when you follow the technical work and you know when the documents are submitted to IEC Central Secretariat, you can also try to get this information up front. But so this is just also a hint to give you more additional information where where your project is. So which can also help you to plan and to organize the necessary work in terms of provision of common modifications, Annex Z and Annex A. And as you have received previously, also, of course, you also have the tab on the legislation where you can find if your project is connected or not. So there are a lot of information available. I just wanted to point out this point. And we will stop here for the moment. I see that we have been answering some questions. So if you have specific questions, do not hesitate to raise it. We still have time to go through some of them, and in some cases we can actually try to reply now in live. So
Yeah.
I can start with the first one, Fred. Yes, I think there is a question from Luis Christman, which says that in addition, the content is in most cases different. International content is much broader than the EU requirements. Indeed, and I think this is why the common modifications are a possibility, and this is left up to the technical bodies to assess whether they need to make modifications to the international content. So what we have been showing here today is just there are different actions and different steps depending when your project is, and of course this should be assessed from the very beginning if it's needed, and then of course you can bring the request for common modification.
I will reply to a question from Federico Dosio. Excuse me if I mispronounce your name. The question is about the possibility to have a meeting with the HAS consultant to discuss the annexes and his comments. And yes, it's still possible today to request a meeting with the HAS consultant. The only condition is to do it following a lack of compliance assessment. So you request an assessment, you have a lack of compliance, and following that lack of compliance, you can request to have a meeting with a HAS consultant. For that, you have to do it through the EY tool, through the meeting request tool that is done by EY. You can find more information in another webinar we did dedicated to the new HAS system.
Right, there is also a question related to the standardization request expiring date. I would say at the moment, most of the standardization requests that are affecting the CENELEC work are not the most recent ones, so they will not have this validity date, but definitely the time frame. It's something that is discussed, and this is something that is discussed in the approval of the standardization requests. I don't think this is a very generic question, and that the publication will appear after the expiration date of the standardization request, unless we are talking about a specific case that we can, of course, divert it to the relevant colleagues. I don't think we can say much more at the moment, but of course what we do in terms of development of standardization request is that if the time frame is very demanding, we highlight that the European Commission and then ensure that that certain actions can be taken. What is also important, and we are also being more careful looking at this, especially when the work comes from IEC, to be aware that IEC is also in the pipeline and that they are willing and to develop the work, and that they are engaged and also can support delivery of the documents in support of the standardization.
I will take a question from, excuse me, Antonio Monaco. Assessment on FDIS, who have to request it when already there was an assessment on inquiry? So it's the same principle for an assessment request on FDIS. It's the CENELEC TC who has to provide all the needed elements and ask the CENELEC Technical PM to request it. CENELEC Technical PM and Data Service and Production. So just ask CCMC for the FDIS formal vote assessment to be requested, and provide all, CENELEC TC should provide all the needed elements for the assessment to be requested.
I can reply to the question from Roman de Vries, and maybe I will also ask you to clarify what you meant. So there is a fundamental difference between the CD in IEC and the CENELEC processes. So we don't really have, so the CD is basically a formal step, and there is an inquiry sent to the national committees. In CENELEC, we don't have this formal step. So you can start preparing the common modification before, of course, but we don't, prior to the inquiry, we don't have a formal step to launch it to the inquiries. Of course, what you can do is circulate it within the technical bodies. And I don't know if this clarifies your question, Rowan, but I suppose so. But if you need the further clarification, do not hesitate.
I will answer a question from François Remens asking if there's a formal definition of common modification. You can find a definition of the common modification inside the CEN and CENELEC internal regulations part 2. So I think it's clause 2.14 where you can find a definition of the common modification. So inside internal regulations part 2. I'll take a question from Antonio Monaco about pre-assessment. Could you please clarify what you mean by pre-assessment?
Gonzalo and Frederic, if you don't mind, I would like to launch the poll. So we have a small feedback poll for the attendees that we would like them to fill in, just the 3 questions, asking them about their feedback about this webinar in order to improve our webinars in the future. So in the meanwhile, people still have some time to enter their questions should they have additional questions. And I would just like to repeat as well that the webinar is being recorded, so all attendees will receive the recording and the complete presentation in their inbox later today.